Find somewhere else to die. Your mother is not here to protect you anymore." Those were the exact words my father said to me. He did not yell. He did not slam his fist on the mahogany desk. He just stared right through me with dead, empty eyes and handed me an eviction notice. My mother had been in her grave for less than 24 hours. The dirt on her casket was still soft. The scent of her favorite vanilla perfume still lingered in the hallways of our home. And yet, the man who was supposed to be my protector had just casually wiped me out of his life. He claimed our house. He claimed her $33 million fortune. And he threw his grieving daughter out onto the street without a single shred of hesitation. But my father made one massive, catastrophic mistake. He underestimated the woman he married. And he completely forgot to read the fine print. I am Regina. I am 25 years old. To the outside world, I grew up in a picture-perfect American dream. We lived in a stunning estate tucked away in a quiet, wealthy suburb. But behind closed doors, our family dynamic was a silent war. My mother was the powerhouse. She built a massive real estate empire from absolute scratch. She worked grueling 80-hour weeks, negotiated cutthroat deals, and sacrificed her own peace to make sure we never had to worry about a single thing. My father? My father was just a passenger. He wore expensive suits paid for by her sweat. He drove luxury cars bought with her investments. He played golf with country club executives, while my mother built the very ground he walked on. She loved him, or at least she tolerated him, for the sake of keeping the family intact. And I loved them both. Because when you are a child, you do not see the cracks in the foundation. You just assume the walls will hold you up forever. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4 cancer. The kind that does not negotiate. The kind that gives you a timeline and watches you fade. For 8 agonizing months, I paused my entire life. I dropped out of my master's degree program. I moved back into my childhood bedroom. I became her full-time caregiver. I administered her medications, held her hand through the brutal chemotherapy sessions, and listened to her ragged breathing in the dead of night. Through all of it, my father was a ghost. He found every excuse to be away. Business trips that did not exist, late-night dinners. He could not handle the reality of sickness, so he simply abandoned us in the same house. Whenever he did walk into her room, he looked at her not with love, but with impatience, like he was waiting for a timer to go off. The day my mother finally closed her eyes for the last time, the world did not just go quiet. It cracked completely in half. Grief is supposed to feel like overwhelming sadness, but my grief felt like being erased. The house I grew up in suddenly felt entirely unfamiliar. The walls felt like they were holding their breath. During the funeral, people came and went. They whispered empty condolences. They brought casseroles we would never eat. But my father? He did not shed a single tear. He did not hold my hand. He stood tall, looking almost relieved. He had already moved on from a tragedy that had not even finished happening. When the final guest left the wake, I stood completely alone in the massive living room. I clutched my mother's knitted sweater to my chest. I was exhausted, shattered, and foolish enough to believe that at least I still had a home. At least I had a father. That illusion shattered the very next morning. At 8 o'clock sharp, my father called me into his study. His tone was so brutally formal, it made my stomach tighten into knots. He did not ask me to sit down. He did not offer a cup of coffee. He just sat behind his massive desk, staring at a thick stack of legal documents. "The house is mine now," he said, his voice flat and clinical. "The assets are my responsibility. The transition will be swift." I stood there, blinking, my brain struggling to process the words. He spoke like a corporate liquidator terminating an employee, not a father speaking to his only child. "What are you talking about?" I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying the night before. He slid a manila folder across the polished wood. Inside were bank statements, property deeds, investment portfolios, numbers so massive they did not even feel real. $33 million. My mother's entire lifetime of blood, sweat, and sacrifice condensed into cold black ink. "I am selling this property," he continued, completely ignoring my confusion. "I am liquidating the domestic accounts. You have until Friday to clear your belongings out of your room. I suggest you start packing today." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Sell the house? Dad, this is our home. Mom loved this place. I live here." That was when he looked up. His eyes locked onto mine, completely devoid of empathy. He leaned back in his leather chair, steepled his fingers, and delivered the execution order. "Find somewhere else to die. Your mother is not here to protect you anymore. You are an adult. Figure it out." There was no anger, no dramatic shouting match, just brutal, chilling certainty. He was discarding me. With my mother gone, I was no longer family. I was just a liability standing between him and a $33 million payday. I waited for a punchline. I waited for a flicker of humanity. I waited for him to break down and say the grief was making him crazy. But nothing came. He just tapped his pen against the desk, dismissing me. That afternoon, I packed my entire existence into 2 suitcases. The silence in the house was deafening. Every step I took felt like a betrayal. I walked past the kitchen island where my mother used to bake cookies. I walked down the staircase where she used to take my school photos. Leaving felt like losing her all over again. I stepped out onto the driveway, completely numb, with no money, no home, and absolutely no idea how a lifetime of belonging could be revoked in 10 seconds. For the next 2 weeks, I lived out of my car and slept on worn-out couches in my friends' cramped apartments. My nights blurred into a dark spiral of disbelief and humiliation. I replayed his cruel words endlessly in my head. I checked my bank account, watching my meager savings dwindle. I felt utterly defeated. I truly believed the villain had won. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Am I speaking with Regina?" an older man asked. His voice was steady and authoritative. "Yes," I replied, staring blankly at the ceiling of my friend's living room. "My name is Arthur Vance. I was your mother's personal attorney. I need you to come down to my office immediately. We need to discuss the reading of the estate." I almost laughed. A bitter, hollow sound. "There is nothing to discuss, Mr. Vance. My father already made it very clear that he owns everything. He took the house. He took the accounts. I have nothing." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When Arthur spoke again, his tone sent a sharp shiver straight down my spine. "Regina, did your father actually read the will?" My heart stopped. "What will?" "Be at my office in 20 minutes, he said, and hung up. I drove to Mr. Vance's office in complete silence. My hands were shaking against the steering wheel. For 2 weeks, I had believed that I was entirely worthless. I believed that my father held all the power, and that my mother had somehow forgotten to protect me. I walked into the polished glass office. Mr. Vance was sitting behind his desk, holding a thick, leather-bound folder. He did not look at me with pity. He looked at me with profound respect. "Sit down, Regina," he said softly. I sat. He opened the folder and turned a heavy, cream-colored document toward me. It was my mother's last will and testament. "Your father is a very arrogant man," Mr. Vance began, his voice completely steady. "Arrogant men rarely pay attention to details. When your mother passed, he saw the total value of the estate, $33 million. He saw his name listed as the primary executor, and he stopped reading. My heart pounded against my ribs. What did he miss?" Mr. Vance leaned forward and pointed to a specific paragraph halfway down the 3rd page. He missed the absolute most important clause in this entire document. Your mother was a brilliant businesswoman. She knew exactly who she married. She knew he would try to take everything. I read the words on the page. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, but the meaning was devastatingly clear. The house was not his. The $33 million were not his. My mother had placed the entirety of her wealth, her properties, and her investments into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. I was the sole beneficiary of that trust. My father was merely granted permission to reside in the house and receive a monthly stipend. But there was a catch, a massive, inescapable catch. "Read Section 4, Mr. Vance instructed. I read it aloud, my voice trembling. The executor's right to reside in the primary estate and his access to the trust's monthly stipend is strictly conditional. He must provide a safe, secure, and permanent residence for my daughter, Regina. Any attempt to evict her, deny her access to the funds, or compromise her well-being will result in the immediate and total forfeiture of his rights to the estate." The room started to spin. The air felt thin. My mother had anticipated his betrayal. She had set a trap, and my father, blinded by his own greed, had walked right into it. "Regina," Mr. Vance said, folding his hands together, "by kicking you out of that house, your father violated the core condition of the trust. He legally terminated his own inheritance. As of this exact moment, he has absolutely nothing. Revenge is usually loud. It is usually full of screaming matches and broken glass. But true, pure revenge is absolutely silent. It is a signature on a piece of paper. It is a frozen bank account." "What happens now?" I asked, wiping a single tear from my cheek. Not a tear of sadness, but a tear of profound vindication. Mr. Vance smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. "Now, we execute the document. I have already drafted the asset freeze. We will submit the forfeiture notice to the probate court this afternoon. By tomorrow morning, your father's reality is going to change very drastically." I did not call my father. I did not text him to gloat. I went back to my friend's cramped apartment, lay down on the uncomfortable sofa, and slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. 72 hours later, the dominoes began to fall. It started on a Thursday morning. I was sitting in Mr. Vance's office when my phone began to light up. It was my father calling. I watched the screen glow, let it ring out, and silenced it. He called again, and again. 6 missed calls in 10 minutes. Then came the text messages. "Regina, pick up the phone. Why is my debit card declining? Call the bank, there is a misunderstanding. Regina, answer me right now." I looked up at Mr. Vance. He was calmly reviewing some paperwork. "The bank just locked his accounts," Mr. Vance noted, checking his computer monitor. "All credit lines have been suspended. The luxury car leases have been flagged for repossession. He is currently standing at a country club with a piece of plastic that is worth absolutely zero." My father had built his entire identity around money that did not belong to him. He loved the power. He loved the control. And with one single legal motion, we had stripped him completely naked. Friday morning arrived. It was time to go home. I did not go alone. I arrived at my childhood estate accompanied by Mr. Vance and 2 local sheriff's deputies. We held the court-ordered eviction notice, signed by a judge just 24 hours prior. I stepped out of the car and looked at the massive front doors. This was the exact spot where I had stood crying 2 weeks ago, holding 2 cheap suitcases, begging my father for a little more time. Mr. Vance rang the doorbell. A moment later, the door swung open. My father stood there in a silk bathrobe. He looked disheveled. The arrogant posture was completely gone. His face was pale, drained of all the false confidence he had worn his entire life. When his eyes landed on me, his jaw tightened. "Regina, what is the meaning of this? Why are the police here? So fix this right now." He was still trying to give orders. He still believed he was the king of a castle he never owned. Mr. Vance stepped forward and handed him a thick manila envelope. "You are hereby served with an immediate notice of eviction. You have violated the terms of the trust. All assets have been legally transferred to the sole beneficiary. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises." My father stared at the document. His hands started to shake. He looked from the papers to the deputies, and finally, to me. "You cannot do this to me," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I am your father." "You lost the right to call yourself that 2 weeks ago," I replied. My voice was completely calm. I felt no rage. I felt absolutely nothing for him. You told me to find somewhere else to die. Now remember? He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The realization finally hit him. He was trapped. There was no negotiation. There was no loophole. The woman he had manipulated for 20 years had reached out from beyond the grave and utterly destroyed him. For the next 60 minutes, I stood in the grand foyer and watched him pack. He scrambled around the house, stuffing designer clothes into duffel bags. He tried to take an expensive painting off the wall, but a deputy firmly ordered him to put it back. The house and everything inside it belonged to me. When the hour was up, he walked out the front door. He looked incredibly small. He did not say a word to me. He just dragged his bags down the long driveway, waiting for a taxi that he would likely struggle to pay for. I closed the heavy wooden door. The lock clicked into place. The echo faded into the high ceilings. For the first time since my mother passed away, the house did not feel cold. It felt safe. I walked into the kitchen, ran my hand along the marble countertop, and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for the mother I had lost. I cried for the family that had never really existed. But mostly, I cried out of profound gratitude. My mother knew that true power is not about cruelty. True power is about protection. She could not be there to shield me from my father's greed, so she built an absolute fortress out of paper and ink. She made sure that I would never have to rely on the mercy of a man who had none. My father never recovered. He tried to sue the estate, but no lawyer would take a case against an airtight trust with zero upfront payment. He ended up moving into a small apartment across the country, living off a meager salary from an entry-level sales job. The luxury life he felt so entitled to was gone forever. I did not keep the $33 million sitting in a bank. I used a portion of the funds to establish a foundation in my mother's name, dedicated to providing emergency housing for young women who find themselves suddenly displaced. I took her lifetime of hard work and turned it into a shield for others. If there is one thing you should take away from my story, it is this. Cruelty always believes it is untouchable. Greed always thinks it has the upper hand. But justice is incredibly patient. Sometimes it waits quietly in a desk drawer, printed on page 3 of a legal document, ready to tear the villain's world apart. If you made it this far, you know that this is more than just a story about money. It is a story about the ultimate chess move. If this story satisfied your craving for justice, do not leave just yet. Hit that subscribe button. Join True Revenge Glory. Because the world is full of people who think they can get away with anything, and we are here to watch them fall. I will see you in the next video.